Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of EoM Coach Conversations. And I am here today with the beautiful Alan Sutton Miller. A brief introduction. Alan has been an early childhood educator for the last 10 years. She's traveled all over the world and she's taught in classrooms in over 5 countries. And she has two kids, and she feels like parent coaching is the highlight of her career because it's the parents where we can make the most impact. Having said that, I am so excited about today's topic. When me and Alan were discussing what we should do, and she mentioned this book that she's reading with, she's going to talk more about the book. I'm going to leave that to her. But this book and the ideas that this book discusses is the reason we as coaches are doing the work that we are doing. There is so much conflict in the world today, so much violence. What we saw in Washington last year and back home where I come from, there's just we've been through so much in the last 10 years because of the global war on terror. And even like any part of the world that you're from right now, you can see it around you. There's so much anger. There's so much hatred between communities, between religions, between ethnicities, all of that. And where does that come from? That's what we're discussing today. Where does this need for control come from? Why do societies become the way they do? What is the root cause of that? That's what Alan is going to be talking about today, and it's going to get heavy, but we're going to try and bring hope as well at the end of this tunnel. We're going to show you the light and how you as parents are doing the most influential, powerful work that there is to be done today, and how the very way that you show up in your homes today changes the society and the world at large. And with that, I'm just going to ask Alan to tell us about this book, how she came to reading it, and what are her biggest takeaways from this.
Absolutely. Thanks for the introduction. So I came across this book when I was in the training program for becoming a parenting coach. And it was just recommended reading, but I'm a nerd, so I went for it and I started reading it, and I was just absolutely shocked and blown away by two things. First, it actually makes so much sense. I can't believe that more people don't have this understanding already, but also it is so dark and really, really scary how the evolution of childhood and parenting has gone through history. And so I'll just give a quick summary of what the author goes through as the evolution of childhood. And it's unfortunately very brutal stuff, and we've come a long way, but we still definitely have progress to make. And so the author is Robin Grill. He's an Australian writer. And way back in the earliest times, the most common way of dealing with children that were a burden on the family was unfortunately just to kill them or leave them to die. And so that's what he referred to as the infanticidal mode. And when you look at other animals in nature, this is a common practice because in order to survive, they have to be able to care for their young. But for humans, we have higher expectations. So for the longest time, that is what parents did if they just didn't want those other children. And then it shifted slightly into what he calls the abandoning mode, which was just a more distanced version of that, where families, if they had too many kids they couldn't care for, or if wealthy families had too many kids and they did not want to disperse that inheritance across so many different children or boys, they would send them away, and then eventually they would not be cared for, and then they would die. So that was the beginning, and that's terrible, terrible things. Then he talks about moving into the ambivalent mode, where parents became more interested in actually controlling how many children they had. And they realized, okay, just leaving them to die is not acceptable, but they did not have any interest in children in terms of caring for them or nurturing in the affection. And for us, they can meet our needs, they can do things for us. And so children were independent, small human beings. And so this mode actually carried all the way into the 18th century, which in the grand scheme of things is not that long ago. But then with the like romantic movement in France with Rousseau, the intrusive mode started taking over, where parents suddenly need some involvement from the parents to make sure those children grow up to be the way we want them to be. And they were seen as very sort of evil, demented, and incapable and just bad. So the parents took the role as, it's our job to get this evilness out of them and turn them into good. And so that was the intrusive mode. And so in the modern age, with more industrial revolution and more modern advances in science, medicine, education, we enter into the socializing mode. And that is the mode that most of us grew up with, that a lot of us are still operating within. And it's the idea that the parent's role is to teach the child how to be a good quality, upstanding member of the society. So the parents want to make sure that the behaviors are appropriate, that they understand the customs, and how to be seen as a good person within the society. And so it's very much about teaching children what to do and what not to do so that they can fit in and be successful. And now we're finally evolving even beyond that into what he calls the helping mode. So now we're not being the authority and telling children what they need to do and what they shouldn't do, but we're seeing children as the independent people that they are, that need our help and they need our care and our support so that they can develop into the truest version of themselves as individuals, and that we can teach them how emotional intelligence is so important for themselves and for relationships with other people. And so this is what he calls the helping mode, so that we are not in charge of the children, but we are helping children become the best kind of person that they can be.
And so I see from this that right now we're in a state of transition from the intrusive mode to the helping mode. And can you talk to me a little bit more about what has all of this led to in the world today? How has that impacted the society? And how is being in the helpful mode today going to change the trajectory of where we were heading to?
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective when you look at world history across so many different cultures and so many different countries, because it has kind of gone up and down. And he illustrates very many low points in how violent and abusive and patriarchal societies led into being in war. He talks about the Yugoslav conflict in the 90s and many others. And of course, the most notable example is the Nazis in Germany in World War II. And you think, how is it possible that such a large group of people, such a big following of one leader could commit all these terrible things? And it's because of what was accepted and normalized in daily life. And so looking at the example of the Nazis, it's not just a case of here's one charismatic, dynamic man that everybody wants to follow. He had so many issues that he was acting out through his power, and he had so many followers because they were accustomed to all of those behaviors. Even if they weren't committing those behaviors themselves, they were accepting the murder, the torture, the genocide, because that's what they were taught as children. And the author mentions there was a popular children's book in Germany. It was sort of like Aesop's fables. Oh, we're going to teach children these lessons and teach them what's right and wrong. But the way that the book taught the lessons was at the end of every story, the child was dismembered or tortured or killed. And these were children's books. And so this is how parents were educating their children of the expectations. So when those children that have already like seen and been exposed to and accepted this sort of violence, when they see it again in real life, they're not as inclined to stand up against it. So that's how we see the negative impact of growing up, physical abuse, emotional abuse. That's what happens. But alongside those negative situations, there were still outstanding positive situations. And even in the case of World War II and the Nazis, he reminded us that the author reminds us that in Denmark, they did not follow through with the orders to surrender all these different groups of people. And he also mentions there was a group of like 600 women in Berlin who all their husbands were all detained and captured. And these women stood up together and refused to leave, to walk away, to let it happen until their husbands were released. And even when the soldiers were firing shots into the crowd, they would disperse to be safe. And they came back together again and literally stood together against what the soldiers were trying to do. And so through the research that he's collected, he was trying to narrow down, what is it? Is it their education background? Is it their lifestyle, their food, their religion? What is it? And he found that it's the parenting style, that households with a lot of violence went this direction, and households where there was more acceptance and nurturing and love, they could stand up against it and not just follow the masses in a really terrible direction.
Yeah, and another point that this author also makes is that for a lot of our recent past, scientists have looked for the violent gene in humans. They've tried to see that is there a particular gene structure which causes violence in people. And maybe if we could alter that or somehow be able to change that, then violence around us would reduce. But research shows that that's not true. It always comes down to attachment. That's where the violence is coming from. How you attach to your primary caregiver, what you've seen in your childhood, that is what is contributing to violence in a person, and then violence in a society on the large scale in terms of wars or even small scale. You see people bickering on the roads with each other. You see low tolerance for somebody who's not like you. Very low tolerance for diversity, for example, all of that. We see so much of that around us. What's the way forward, Alan?
Well, the way forward is all about, it comes down to behaviors or interactions. And so the parents do have the responsibility and the opportunity to choose behaviors and to choose interactions that promote empathy and promote emotional intelligence, because that is what's required to have healthy human relationships. And what he really dives into is that you cannot have empathy. You cannot even begin to consider what anyone else's point of view is, what their perspective is, much less what their needs are, if you are so stuck in protecting yourself or hiding behind shame that has been built into you your entire life. When you are so stuck behind that wall of abuse and neglect and shame, then you cannot step out and go to other people to begin to help them. And so that's the real power in choosing the path of peaceful parenting, because that opens the children to be able to grow into adults that can see other people and connect with other people and be willing and able to help other people when they need it.
That's correct. So the way forward is peaceful parenting. And I feel like there will be a lot of parents here who will watch this and who will somehow feel guilty for not knowing better, for not for having gone down the road of shaming their children, bribing their children, violence, even physical violence. What do you have to say to those parents?
The best thing about being human is that we have the capacity for change. And so as hard as it is, with this really, really long history of terrible things behind us that have taught us how to be up to this point, if this is the first time you're even considering what you're doing as a parent, that's okay, because getting started right now and making conscious choices and taking actions to learn more to practice new techniques and strategies to be a different parent in the future, that is what matters right now. So you can't beat yourself up for what you were doing before because it's been ingrained in you. It's part of your ego, it's part of your history, it's part of ancestry, it's part of human civilization. So you can't let your past keep you from making changes for a better future, because and that's the really hard work, is that we are human, and so we do live out our patterns. We do default to the easy habits, even when those easy habits are detrimental. That's why, and I mean, I can speak from my own experience. That's why, as parents, it's so hard. You get caught in the moment, and all of that background just takes over. And then when it's all said and done, you're like, what just happened? Why was I screaming at my kids? I don't want to scream at my kids. Why am I threatening them? If you don't eat your apples, and if you don't sit still at the dinner table, and if you don't do this, then you're not getting this. Why am I doing that? I don't need to do that. And so it's that conflict between knowing what you don't want to do and realizing that you've been doing it, and shifting it to something different. And so it takes a lot of self exploration, a lot of self reflection, and a lot of honesty with yourself to be able to unpack what is leading to all those choices, and then to begin to unravel that so that you can move forward with better choices in the future. And it takes a lot of work, but it's possible. It is absolutely possible.
And that's also why we're here. A lot of times we feel like parenting should be instinctive. We should, and sometimes society tells us this, that we should know what to do. But what's really happening is that we're really just, following generational patterns. What has been done to us, we pass that on to our children. It's not conscious. We don't really think about what's happening in the moment. And especially when our buttons are pushed, especially when we're triggered, that's when we go into that mode of violence towards our children. And what we really need to do, I feel, is heal those generational patterns. And sometimes I feel that this is a collective social trauma that we have. It is ancestral trauma that we need to heal. And we as parent coaches dive deep into that with the mothers, with the fathers who need this sort of support, who've been victims of childhood abuse. And what we are saying is childhood abuse today wasn't even considered childhood abuse 15 years ago.
Exactly.
So, and some people will not be willing to accept that what happened to them was actually childhood abuse. They feel like they turned out fine. So I feel the first starting point should be saying, yes, that did happen to me, and I need to heal that, acceptance of what happened to you, and then moving on to seeking help where parenting is not instinctive.
Exactly. I want to expand on that point, because
Sure.
yeah, we as humans are animals. And like you were saying earlier, there's not actually a genetic predisposition to violence. We are not wired for violence, but we are wired for survival. And so just as much as we are not meant to be violent, we also are not meant to be nurturing necessarily. Like our instincts rely on everything that we can do to survive. So our instincts just keep us around, keep us going, keep the children close enough, long enough so that they can then be independent. But now, as evolved humans and as social animals that have such a huge capacity for relationship and social relationships, we need to find a way to make those relationships work for the positive. And so what you're saying as well, that the experiences that maybe we had growing up, no, my parents didn't spank me or abuse me or like neglect me. No, but we overlook the effects of shame and blame and emotional distancing and emotional numbing, because that's just what was written in and what we need to.
The computer fell off.
Okay, that's okay. Just do it like that. Okay. Excuse me.
Okay.
So the effects of we do have effects from less than beneficial relationships. And so, like you said, we have to realize that first, because all of that baggage is what triggers us and makes us flare up when we're interacting with our children, because our ego pulls us back to our safety zone, and that pulls us back to how we were as children. So when our kids are displaying something that we as children never learned how to handle, then we kind of go into chaos, panic, reactivity, because we haven't figured that out from our own childhood yet. And so now we don't know what to do for our children in front of us. And there was another point in there that it all, if people are wondering, well, no, I'm not hitting my kids, I'm not yelling that much. Like, yeah, they're fine. So, like, what is the deciding factor between just a socializing authoritarian parent versus the helping, nurturing, authoritative parent? And I think the best perspective is power. Because if you're a parent that is saying, you do this, and this is good behavior, and oh, good little girls don't slurp their milkshakes, and things like that, making judgments about the child as a person, that's putting you in a position of higher power over the child, that they have to fit into a certain way and be a certain person so that you can have the power and they can be below you. But if you can have interactions and be authentic with yourself to say, oh, in our house, we don't like making noises like that when we eat dinner. So let's try this a different way. You're not saying that child is bad because they're slurping. You're saying that your family has a value for making less noise when they eat. And that's something that you can all do together. And it's about equalizing the power so that you bring children into their power by supporting them and acknowledging them. And you also bring yourself down from dominance by saying, I really messed up. You know what? I didn't mean for that to turn out that way. You are really sad because of what I did, and I'm so sorry. And I think those kinds of interactions definitely equalize the power structure within a family. And when that power structure is equalized in a family, then those are the children that go out in the world and say, whoa, 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 boss, I'm actually not afraid of losing my job or getting demoted because I know who I am and my integrity. And what you're asking me to do is not okay. And they are the ones that will stand up and stop other people from their oppression, from their intolerance, from their hatred. And that's the ripple effect. When we raise children and families that have this dynamic, then they are out in the world with all their other relationships doing the same thing and helping other people in the same way.
And then imagine a world of, say, a generation of children raised this way, going out into the world without feeling like they need to have more power, because when they were children, when they were little, they were powered over. So now that they're big, they have the power, and they need somebody who's smaller than them in any which way, be it in size, be it in income, be it between countries, whatever. They don't feel the need to assert themselves because they felt heard when they were children. They don't need to shout. They don't need to be violent to just feel heard, because that is what came down to. Imagine Hitler being heard as a child. Imagine that sort of childhood for him. How different the world would have been today. How different the world I imagine to be if we can, empower parents to just be different from how they were parented. And that is the message of hope that we want to leave everybody here with today, that it is up to you. It is up to you how you show up in your homes today, how you interact with your children today, how you give them that nurturance, that attachment, how you make them feel seen and heard and understood and valued just as they are, unconditionally. That's what's going to change the world.
Exactly. And it's we also have to give a reality check. It's not going to be a switch that you flip and you're just a new parent when you wake up tomorrow. I wish it was that easy, because then I would just wake up and be the best mom ever. But every day is a new opportunity to do your best. And so what I think is great is that there really is a growing community of people that believe in this, that understand the impact, and are here to support each other. So when you decide, yes, that is what I want to do for my family, yes, that is the change I want to make, then come find us, because the parent coaches are here to help you, because you can't do it alone. If everyone could do it alone, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd be living in utopia with the cleanest air and oceans and democratic nations all over the world. And that's what we're aiming for. But in the meantime, we need to help each other to go through that process to get to that point of really helping our children.
And if the pandemic hasn't shown you that, and I mean, we've lost our villages and see where we are now. So many of us so frustrated with how things are. So yes, with that, Lena, Alan, where can people find you?
Sorry. I can't figure out. Just stay and I'll help you in 1 minute. Thanks. Sorry for the interruptions. That's parenting in school and pandemic. I am so sorry. What was your last question?
Yes, Alan, where can people find you?
Yes, you can find me on my website, which is child-connection.com. And also, if you just like tips and inspiration and feeling good, follow me on Instagram, child_connection.
Yes. I have been following you, and you're doing a great job. And thank you so much for this very enlightening conversation today. I can be found at Elasticity of Momming. That's the website and the Facebook page and Instagram. And I leave here with like a very short story about myself. I always wanted to change the world. That was my big dream. And I thought I'd become so somebody told me, oh, corporations change the world. So I studied business and I went to a business school, and then I worked at multinationals and corporations. And I was like, no, they're not changing the world. They have their vested interests. So then I studied economics, and I thought I could become like a politician or, somebody like that. And then I changed the world. And then I realized, no, that's not the way to change the world. And when I became a mom, and when I saw that little girl in front of me with, a blank slate that she could be whoever she wanted to be, given that I gave her that nurturance. And that's where, this place here now as a parenting coach is truly where I feel like I can change the world, one mother at a time, one father at a time. This is like my true calling.
I'm right there with you. And I even worked in corporate America and thought, anyone can do this. I'm going to move into education. This is awesome. And I worked with younger and younger kids. And I realized even in my toddler classrooms, they're only 18 months old. I thought, I really want to get to these parents even before this. So it really comes down to the parents. The parents have the influence. Yes. You parents can influence your children and the world.
That's so true. And with that, thank you everybody who's watching us here today. If you have any more questions for me or Alan, you can leave them here on the comments box or on our individual pages. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Sajad.